If you were to travel into the rural, hilly countryside of north-central Massachusetts, specifically to a place called Dunwich, you would find a landscape that feels fundamentally tired. It is a place of decaying farms, isolated valleys, and strange, unsettling geological formations. In H.P. Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror, this physical decay is more than just a setting, it is a symptom. The village is a place where the air feels heavy, with a sense of moral and biological decline, and at the heart of this decline sits the Whateley family. The Whateleys are a lineage that the locals view with a mixture of suspicion and outright dread. They live in a dilapidated farmhouse, and for years the family has been defined by a strange, secretive energy. Old Whateley, the patriarch, was a man of immense, unnatural strength who spent much of his time making odd modifications to the property. He boarded up the upper story of the house and built a separate tool shed, working with a frantic, secretive intensity. When he died in 1924, he was surrounded by a massive rhythmic swarm of whippoorwills, a detail that signals to the reader that the natural order in Dunwich has already begun to fray. The true source of the town's unease, however, is his grandson, Wilbur Whateley. Wilbur is not a normal boy. From a very young age, it became clear that his development was defying every known law of biology. By the age of 4, he already possessed the intellect of a teenager, and his physical appearance was nothing short of grotesque. He had goat-like features, a strange, unsettling gait, and a way of looking at the world that felt entirely alien. As Wilbur grew, the Whateley property became the centre of local rumours. People spoke of strange, rhythmic noises coming from the sealed-off upper floor of the farmhouse, of foul odours drifting on the wind, and of cattle disappearing from nearby pastures without a trace. As the years passed, the situation escalated from local superstition to something much more sinister. Wilbur's mother, Lavinia, a woman described as being physically deformed and deeply reclusive, vanished in 1926 following a night of intense, unnatural whippoorwill activity. By 1928, Wilbur had transformed into a creature that was barely recognizable as human. He stood 8 feet tall, possessed a goatish, distorted anatomy, and yet he had acquired an immense, terrifyingly vast erudition. He was no longer just a local oddity, he was a scholar of the forbidden. Driven by a need to complete some dark purpose, Wilbur travelled to Miskatonic University to consult the Necronomicon, a book of ancient, blasphemous lore. It was here that he encountered Henry Armitage, a librarian who sensed immediately that Wilbur's intellect was not the result of mere study, but of something much more cosmic and predatory. The tension reached a breaking point when a monstrous, multi-dimensional creature, something that appeared part human, part reptilian, and part tentacled horror, broke into the Miskatonic library. The creature was found dead in a pool of foul-smelling ichor, and in the chaos, Wilbur Whateley met his end as well. His body did not die like a man's, instead it underwent a grotesque disintegration, leaving behind nothing but a sticky whitish mass. But the death of Wilbur was not the end of the horror, it was merely the beginning of the physical manifestation of it. In the aftermath of Wilbur's death, an unseen entity began to terrorize the Dunwich countryside. This was not a ghost or a spirit, but a massive physical force that left colossal, multi-limbed tracks in the earth and destroyed the Fry farmhouse with ease. The locals were paralyzed by fear, facing an enemy they could not see, but could certainly feel in the destruction it left behind. Dr. Armitage, the librarian who had encountered Wilbur, became the primary investigator into this nightmare. By deciphering Wilbur's cryptic diary, Armitage realized the terrifying truth. Wilbur was not just a freak of nature, but a biological bridge. He was a being undergoing a transfiguration, a creature designed to clear the way for entities from outside our dimension. The entity roaming the hills was not a separate monster, but a fragment of a cosmic force. Specifically, Wilbur's twin brother, an extra-dimensional being that had been gestating in secret. The climax of the story takes place on Sentinel Hill. Armitage, alongside Professor Rice and Dr. Morgan, tracked the invisible monster using a chemical sprayer to reveal its outline. What they saw was a sight that defied the laws of geometry and biology, a shifting, jelly-like monstrosity that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. As a supernatural storm descended upon the hill, filled with a purplish light and the sound of non-human chanting, the scholars realized that conventional weapons and scientific logic were useless. To fight a cosmic horror, they had to use the very tools the Whateleys had used. In a desperate final ritual, Armitage and the others stood before an ancient altar stone. They called upon the name of Yog, Sothoth, the Gate and the Guardian, amidst guttural, non-human vocalizations that seemed to echo from the void itself. The result was a cataclysmic explosion of light and a wave of toxic, soul-crushing stench that swept across the countryside. The ritual worked. The entity was forcibly sent back to its home dimension, leaving behind a landscape that was permanently scarred and a community gripped by a primal, lasting terror. When we look at the Dunwich Horror, it is easy to get lost in the imagery of the monster itself, but the real weight of the story lies in what Lovecraft is saying about the nature of our world. One of the most prominent themes is the idea of biological and moral degeneration. The physical decay of the village of Dunwich is a direct reflection of the Whateley bloodline. In Lovecraft's view, the breakdown of the natural order is not just a matter of bad luck or bad genetics, it is a sign of a deeper, cosmic rot. The Whateleys represent a terrifying possibility, that humanity is not the pinnacle of evolution, but merely a temporary occupant on a planet that has been inhabited by much older, much stranger things for eons. This leads us into the concept of cosmic indifference. In many traditional horror stories, the monster has a motive. It wants to kill, or it wants to rule, or it wants revenge. But the entity in Dunwich doesn't feel evil in a way we can understand. It is a force of nature, like a storm or an earthquake, but one that originates from a dimension where our laws of physics and morality don't apply. The horror comes from the realization that we are insignificant. We are like ants trying to understand the footsteps of a giant. The giant isn't trying to crush us out of malice, it simply doesn't even notice we are there. Lovecraft also plays heavily with the uncanny and the non-Euclidean. He uses descriptions of geometry and biology that shouldn't exist to trigger a sense of existential dread. When Armitage sees the creature, he isn't just seeing a big monster, he is seeing something that defies the way our brains are wired to perceive space and shape. This is a hallmark of Lovecraft's style. The idea that the most profound terror isn't something that can be fought with a gun or understood with a microscope, but something that breaks our fundamental understanding of reality. This brings us to the failure of materialism. Throughout the story, there is a tension between the scientific world of the university and the occult world of the Whateleys. Initially, the characters try to approach the problem through the lens of traditional science or local law enforcement, but those methods fail completely. The resolution of the story requires a shift from the material to the metaphysical. To defeat a being that defies the laws of nature, the protagonists must turn to ancient, forbidden rituals. It is a cynical, yet profound, suggestion. Science can explain how the world works, but it is utterly powerless against the things that exist outside of it. It is interesting to note how this story has been interpreted and adapted over the decades. For example, the 1970 film adaptation of The Dunwich Horror took a very different direction. While the book is a slow-burn study of biological decay and existential dread, the film leaned into the psychedelic aesthetics of the late 60s. It turned Wilbur into a more sensual, seductive figure, and used colourful posterized imagery to represent the supernatural. While some critics found this to be a departure from Lovecraft's grim tone, others argue it was a clever way to visually represent the non-Euclidean and extra-dimensional concepts that are so difficult to describe in prose. The film moved the horror from the realm of the biological to the realm of the psychedelic, highlighting the tension between the literal, grounded horror of the book and the more abstract, sensory horror of the screen. Ultimately, the Dunwich Horror leaves us with a sense of profound unease. The ending isn't a victory in the traditional sense. While the immediate threat is gone, the world has been changed, the landscape is scarred, the local community is broken, and the knowledge of what lies beyond the veil is a burden that cannot be unlearned. The story suggests that humanity is merely a temporary tenant on an earth that is far stranger and more crowded than we care to admit. We live in the cracks of a much larger, much more terrifying reality, and sometimes those cracks open wide enough to let the outside in.